Today we are going to talk about ranked choice voting. So what is ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting is an electoral system that allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference. Voters can rank as many candidates as they choose. Here's an example ballot using ranked choice voting. There are 6 candidates on this ballot. Voters can rank up to 6 candidates. They choose one candidate as their first choice, one candidate as their second choice, and so on. These are all valid completed ballots. In this case, a voter chose to rank 4 candidates, another voter chose to rank only 2 candidates, and another voter chose to rank only their first choice. Here's a real-life ranked choice voting ballot used in Maine this past November 2020. Okay, but once the votes are in, how are they counted? Let's work through an example. This is a single winner race between 3 candidates. In order to win, a candidate needs to surpass the 50% threshold. First, all the first choice votes are counted. If a candidate has already surpassed the 50% threshold, then that's it. That candidate wins and the race is over. But in our example, none of the 3 candidates have won in the first round. Candidate A is ahead, but hasn't passed the 50% threshold. Since there is no winner yet, the candidate in last place is eliminated. In this example, candidate C had 15 votes, the fewest of all candidates, and is eliminated. The second choice votes must now be revealed for the ballots that were previously assigned to the now eliminated candidate. Here we can see that 5 of the voters that had chosen candidate C as their first choice voted for candidate B as their second choice, and 10 of the voters had chosen candidate A as their second choice. Those ballots are transferred to their second choice candidate. And now candidate A has the 50% threshold and has won the election. This was a pretty simple example because there were only 3 candidates, so there could be at most 2 rounds of counting, and in the end, the initial plurality winner still won the election. Before going into a more complicated example, let's review a few terms. In ranked choice voting, we talk about transferring votes. A vote is transferred when it moves from an eliminated candidate to the next ranked candidate on that ballot. We will also talk about exhausted ballots. An exhausted ballot is a ballot that cannot be transferred to another candidate because it does not list any additional ranked candidates. Once a ballot is exhausted, it no longer affects the outcome of an election. We'll see an example of this soon. Additional things to know include that not all ranked choice voting elections will have multiple rounds. It is possible for a candidate to receive the majority of the votes in the first round and therefore be declared the winner in the first round. The 50% plus 1 vote threshold applies to single winner elections. The thresholds for multi-winner elections vary based on the number of winners. We will be focusing today's analysis on single winner elections, but we'll make a few notes about multi-winner elections here and there. Now, let's take a look at a more complicated example. We held a mock election for the best pizzeria. There were 5 candidates and 26 voters. In the first round, Glass Nickel is ahead with 9 votes. Glass Nickel would be the plurality winner of this election. But the 50% threshold that needs to be crossed is 13 votes, so we move on to the next round. Rocky Rococo is in last place and is eliminated. The 2 ballots that listed Rocky Rococo as their first choice both listed Ian's as their second choice. So those 2 votes are transferred to Ian's. Still, no one has crossed the winning threshold, so we go on to round 3. Sugar River is now in last place and is eliminated. The 4 ballots that were listed for Sugar River have varying choices for their next ranked candidates, so those votes are transferred accordingly. Still, no one has crossed the winning threshold, so we go on to round 4. Roman Candle is now in last place and is eliminated. There were 6 votes in Roman Candle. 2 of those ballots did not have a next ranked candidate and are now considered exhausted. 1 of the ballots listed Glass Nickel as the next ranked candidate and is transferred there, and 3 listed Ian's and are transferred there. Ian's has now crossed the 50% threshold and has won the ranked choice election. Using ranked choice voting for this election resulted in a different winner than plurality would have. Ian's ended up having broader support than Glass Nickel did. Now that we understand how ranked choice voting works, let's talk about who is using ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting has been used internationally in some places for over 100 years. Australia, Ireland, and Malta are just a few countries that use ranked choice voting. Maine has been using ranked choice voting for statewide and state assembly elections since 2018, and Alaska has just recently passed a voting system that includes ranked choice voting. Over 25 municipalities in the U.S. are using ranked choice voting for local elections, including many in our neighboring Minnesota. As we just mentioned, one recent proposal that included ranked choice voting was in Alaska. Ballot Measure 2 was approved in November 2020 with a razor-thin 51% support. Their new system will consist of top 4 open primaries, followed by ranked choice voting general elections. Supporters of Alaska's ballot measure included the League of Women Voters of Alaska, the Libertarian Party of Alaska, and some independent groups including Fair Vote, which is one of the main proponents of ranked choice voting nationwide. Opponents included the Republican Party of Alaska and the additional groups listed here. For a more extensive list of both supporters and opponents, please check out ballotpedia.org, which is a great resource for finding this information. Another recent ballot measure in November 2020 was in Massachusetts. This ballot measure was for implementing ranked choice voting for both primary and general elections for certain races. It failed with 55% of voters opposed to the measure. Supporters of the Massachusetts ballot measure included the League of Women Voters of Massachusetts, the Democratic Party of Massachusetts, and some additional groups listed here. Opponents included the current governor and lieutenant governor, the Republican Party of Massachusetts, and Americans for Tax Reform. For a more complete list of both supporters and opponents, visit the related ballotpedia.org page for this ballot measure. In addition to those 2 proposals that made it onto the ballot in 2020, there were 2 proposals that did not make it onto the ballot that year. Both of these proposals were for open primaries with ranked choice voting, similar to Alaska's measure. Each of these failed to make it to the ballot due to technicalities in the ballot measure approval process. It is likely that the groups sponsoring these measures will try again soon. So, we can see that there's a lot of things happening across the country with ranked choice voting. Why are ranked choice voting proposals popping up everywhere? What are the claimed benefits of ranked choice voting? Well, let's dive into the arguments for ranked choice voting. Proponents cite ranked choice voting's increased voter choice and expression compared to plurality voting. Ranked choice voting allows voters to not choose only one candidate, but to choose many and to indicate an order of preference. This is a higher level of voter expression compared to plurality and also when compared to approval voting. Ranked choice voting is more likely to result in a majority-supported winner than plurality. It is not guaranteed, but it is almost always the case that a ranked choice voting election will result in a majority-supported winner. Supporters also cite the fact that ranked choice voting eliminates the spoiler effect. A vote for a lesser supported candidate isn't wasted since it can be transferred to the voter's next ranked candidate. Since the spoiler effect is eliminated, proponents cite the increased ability for a voter to vote sincerely rather than tactically. Voters no longer have to worry that voting for their first choice candidate will cause their vote to be thrown away. Ranked choice voting decreases the total number of wasted votes. As candidates are eliminated, those votes are transferred to their next ranked candidate, increasing each ballot's possibility of contributing to a winning candidate. Since the winner will have more than a majority of the votes, that means more than a majority of the votes will be considered not wasted. Supporters also note that ranked choice voting increases the viability of third-party and independent candidates as well as the visibility of their support. Ranked choice voting also encourages positive campaigning. Candidates need to campaign not only to their core supporters, but also to additional voters that might list them as a second or third choice. Negative campaigns against another candidate would decrease one's chance of being ranked on the ballots of that candidate's primary supporters. Proponents also like that ranked choice voting implementations can allow more candidates in the general election. Allowing more candidates in a general election would decrease the number of primaries that exist simply to reduce the field. This allows the general election to have more influence over the outcome than the lower turnout primary elections. Ranked choice voting has been shown to increase the representation of women and people of color. Studies done in the Bay Area alongside of ranked choice voting implementation demonstrates this increase in minority representation. And finally, ranked choice voting supports proportional representation when used in multi-winner elections. That sounds like a lot of benefits, but no voting system is perfect. And as we saw, there are some groups that oppose ranked choice voting. So what are the arguments against ranked choice voting? To demonstrate the arguments against ranked choice voting, we'll include some quotes from people who oppose the Massachusetts ranked choice voting ballot measure. We are using quotes from Massachusetts since that was the only recent ballot measure that was focused solely on ranked choice voting, without other election-related changes. and the opposition ultimately won in Massachusetts. The first and most frequent argument heard against ranked choice voting is that it is too complicated for voters to understand. We see here a quote that calls it a complex and confusing process that could lead to reduced voter participation. The quote also mentions difficult to explain results. This argument against ranked choice voting is focused on the fact that ranked choice voting is more complicated than plurality voting, and questions whether voters can understand both how to vote and how the votes are counted. The next common argument against ranked choice voting is that voters won't be informed enough to rank candidates. Here, an opponent questions whether it's possible for a voter to know enough about 7 candidates to differentiate between them. This argument focuses on the fact that giving voters more choices and ways to express their preferences may require that voters be more informed about these choices. Another argument against ranked choice voting is that it simply doesn't fix everything. In this quote, an opponent of ranked choice voting points out that implementing ranked choice voting by itself won't fix the fact that they have a high number of uncontested elections. A few more arguments against ranked choice voting include that it requires centralized tallying, which could create the perception of delayed results. Many places are used to reporting elections results locally. In ranked choice voting, all votes need to be in before the first round can be considered complete. If it is a statewide election, the entire state's votes need to be in before one can determine if there is a winner in the first round, and if not, which candidate is eliminated. This could lead to a perceived delay in reporting results. Another common argument against ranked choice voting is that it requires more advanced voting machines. Many places might not have voting machines that can handle ranked choice voting. One thing to note is that H.R. 1 includes language strongly suggesting that any federal funds used to replace voting machines must replace them with machines capable of ranked choice voting. This language is in the proposed 2021 H.R. 1 and was also in 2019's H.R. 1. These are the most common arguments made against ranked choice voting. In addition to these commonly cited issues, there are a couple less commonly understood issues. These focus on the mathematical criteria that ranked choice voting violates. Ranked choice voting can violate monotonicity and consistency participation. Monotonicity means that it should not be possible to harm a candidate by increasing that candidate's rank on one's ballot. The opposite should also be true. It should not be possible to help a candidate by decreasing their rank on one's ballot. In ranked choice voting, this principle doesn't always hold true. There are cases where increasing a candidate's rank on one's ballot could have the unintended consequence of causing that candidate to lose. This happens because moving candidate rankings around on a ballot can change which candidates are eliminated in a round, and therefore change which candidates ultimately square off in the end. Researchers estimate that this could happen between 5 and 15% of the time. Critics point to the 2009 election in Burlington, Vermont as an example. This election exhibited the potential for non-monotonicity. That is, after reviewing the full ballot data, cases were found where if certain ballots were changed to increase a specific candidate's rank, it would have caused that candidate to lose. This potential hinges on very specific changes made in very specific numbers. The specific circumstances needed and the unpredictable nature of non-monotonicity means it would be difficult or impossible for any group to take strategic advantage of the lack of monotonicity. But the lack of monotonicity is something that needs to be acknowledged and understood. Let's take a look at the next mathematical criterion violation, consistency and participation. Consistency and participation indicates that voting honestly in an election should always be better than not voting at all. When this is violated, it is referred to as the no-show paradox, because those voters would have been better off if they had not shown up. The mechanism causing this paradox to exist is similar to what causes the lack of monotonicity, in that changing the rankings of candidates on some ballots can change who is eliminated and who ultimately squares off in the end. The no-show paradox is a low-frequency event. The frequency increases as the number of candidates increases, but it converges to 0 as the number of voters increases. For example, a race with more than 1,000 voters and 4 candidates has negligible frequency of the no-show paradox. It is similarly a weakness that cannot be taken advantage of strategically, but still needs to be acknowledged and understood. So for both of these mathematical criteria violations, one should be aware that they exist, but also keep in mind the low frequency and low potential for strategic advantage that they pose. Detailed examples of both of these will be included in the appendix of our study. To summarize the arguments against ranked choice voting, we can put them in a few buckets. The first is voter education. This bucket contains the arguments that it's too complicated for voters to understand, and that voters won't be informed enough to perform the rankings. The next bucket is cost. This includes the increased costs needed to educate voters on a more complicated system, and the upfront costs needed to update voting machines. The next bucket is time. The system can take more time to get an election result. And the last bucket is the potential for mathematical criterion violations, leading to unexpected results. All electoral systems violate some mathematical criteria, leading to what one could call unexpected results. The two we discussed, monotonicity and consistency participation, are the two most commonly brought up when discussing ranked choice voting. We are going to move on to talk about some of the combination electoral systems that include ranked choice voting. These systems grew out of the fact that, as we saw mentioned in the arguments against it, ranked choice voting doesn't fix everything by itself. If our elections frequently have only 2 candidates or are uncontested, then implementing ranked choice voting will have very little effect. Top 4 with ranked choice voting is the combination system that was approved in Alaska. A top 4 system has a unified primary, that is, a primary in which all candidates run in one race regardless of party affiliation. This system uses plurality voting in the primary, and the top 4 winners go on to the general election, which then uses ranked choice voting. Final 5 voting is a term used to refer to a system identical to top 4 with ranked choice voting, except that it allows 5 candidates to move forward to the general election. One could imagine other combination systems as well, such as a system that might use approval voting in the primaries, leading to a ranked choice general election. A few closing notes, and then we will have time for questions and discussion. The arguments against ranked choice voting shouldn't be ignored, but many of the issues brought up can be mitigated. Voter education is obviously incredibly important. Voters need to know how to vote, how the votes are counted, and when to expect results. Voters also need access to enough information to be able to rank candidates in an informed manner. There are upfront costs involved in implementing any new system, including ranked choice voting. And surrounding systems, including primaries and existing candidate limits, need to be taken into consideration when evaluating if ranked choice voting would have benefits on its own, or if a combination system that may include ranked choice voting is more suitable. And now, let's ask questions and discuss.